Good evening, and welcome to CITI Media Reporter here at Columbia University. I'm Howard Homonoff, and thank you for joining us. Our guest tonight, and I think it's safe to say this is the first former cabinet secretary that we've ever had on the show, hopefully just the first of many, and certainly I suspect maybe the only cabinet member we'll ever have who joined his brother in the cabinet. So it's my great pleasure to welcome Kerry, who is the former acting Secretary of Commerce and General Counsel to the Commerce Department. Thank you for joining us.
Howard, great to be here.
So there's so many topics that you dealt with during your government tenure and that crossed your desk at Commerce. But I got to start with the thing that I suspect the kind of the sexy question that everybody has got to have a lot of curiosity about. You were the acting secretary when the Eric Snowden disclosures came about. Take us inside for a minute, as inside as you can comfortably go. And what was it like getting the call, and what did you have to do?
Well, I was in the Secretary's office at the time. I think I'd been there a matter of a few days when the first Snowden stories broke and really responded to the stories. First thing I did was reach out to the NSA to ask to get briefed on the programs that were disclosed. It was the 215 collection program and also, the so-called 702 email collection program. And reach out to them to urge them to be as transparent as possible. It clearly, I thought, had some programs and measures in place to sort of narrow the information that's actually used, but they needed to do a better job of getting that message out. And I think it was a challenge. It was a challenge because broadly, one of the challenges I found in the government is that we do slice and dice things into silos, compartments, departments, and something like the digital economy, the internet that touches so many things. That's a complication. So a lot of blind spots. And I think the first response by the administration was to sort of put the blinders on, look at this as a national security issue. This was a WikiLeaks all over again. And so not to understand fully some of the issues that I was concerned about, which were the impact this would have on sort of trust in the American model of internet governance, the impact that this would have on trust in the digital economy and American companies that are major players. And unfortunately, I think the president and others in the White House would agree that the first response is they would don't worry. No Americans are being spied on, just fanned the flames internationally. And that was frustrating to watch.
And did how quickly, maybe it's not a matter of quick, but did the government sort of have to put in place internally sort of a whole different set of ways of operating? It hadn't seen an Eric quite, there was, as you said, there was WikiLeaks, but this was very different. Did the government have to change the government, in a lot of ways?
Yeah, I think it took some doing, but I think one of the first things that the White House did was say, all right, we've got to have somebody looking at privacy across sort of all of the different compartments of the White House. And really began a process that's produced a number of different things. I mean, the president talked early on about wanting to have a national conversation about privacy. He, I think, really wanted to get out and himself engage on these issues. He was a constitutional law professor. He does care about these things and really wanted to deal with it. I think the sort of substitute for that was to appoint the review board of trusted advisors that looked at the major programs from September, August to December to get the Privacy and Civil Liberties Oversight Board in, empower them, and ultimately to bring in John Podesta, who led the White House Big Data Review, understands these issues, very well, and he was sort of the conversation on privacy that the president wanted to have.
And from a commerce perspective, or from where you sat, what did you feel like was your sort of, that you had a lot of things you had to do. What was kind of the top priority for you in being an internal advocate of certain positions or on behalf of, the Commerce Department's always historically sort of been the voice of American business, or a place where business knew it could go in the cabinet. Did you kind of have to be business's advocate in some sense in those conversations?
Well, I mean, to look at this from the standpoint of certainly its impact on business. The tech sector is an incredible leader of the American economy, and seriously affected by this. I think also to look at this in terms of how it affects the internet, the way that we govern the internet. The Department of Commerce has the National Telecommunications and Information Administration, which oversees the relationship with ICANN, which has been in the news lately because of the plans to take the United States government out of that role. And that is part of a broad global debate about how the internet is governed. And I think there are a lot of countries around the world that see it as some kind of a symbol of American hegemony. The NSA disclosures simply fed that. The internet is just it's a way of the U.S. Being able to spy on people, and a way for U.S. companies to be able to spy on people. So that's that has been the real damage. I think part of the response to get the U.S. out of the business of supervising to say, look, in order to protect freedom on the internet, in order to maintain a free and open and non-governmental internet against the efforts of Russia and China and some other countries to kind of bring this under multilateral governmental control, whether it's the UN or something else. In order to protect that freedom, we need to give up that last little bit of U.S. government control that we have.
And is that we see in a number of other areas where there's almost no area in Washington that's not partisan, okay? But when it involves U.S. sovereignty, working with others, whether it's international, non-governmental organizations, et cetera, those. Is this an issue which is partisan? Is
There's
it
some partisanship? And you get some people, mostly I think Republicans, who say no, we shouldn't give that up. I understand where they're coming from in terms of wanting to protect internet freedom and feeling that relinquishing that, so we lose some of the leverage to do that. I think the United States has been a very good and faithful steward of the internet in that role. It's really kind of kept hands off and let sort of the technologists and civil non-governmental organizations and others really take the lead. Other governments wouldn't necessarily do that. So I understand where they're coming from. But I think the best way to get there, the best way to protect that, is say, all right, the United States government is going to set the example by not exercising that little bit of control.
As you speak, and we were talking before we started about how much the Snowden incident has forced all of us, literally from the president to everyone on, using their mobile phone, to think differently about the world of data around us and who's watching us or what we're supposed to do or not do with respect to this. How are we supposed to view Snowden? So how there's such, not that I expect a consensus, but from the Traitor, Espionage Act, legal claims, the flight, then some see him in some heroic, more kind of, Daniel Ellsberg, Pentagon Papers or whatever it may be. Do you have I don't know if you have a conclusion or it remains kind of a work in progress, how we're supposed to view Snowden?
Well, I think to go to where you started the question, I think you said it when we were talking a little bit before we came on the air, that the Snowden disclosures were for privacy and security, what 9/11 was to terrorism. It was just a huge watershed event that has changed everything. I think clearly there's some significant issues that have been raised by this. It's been important to have this discussion, but the collateral damage has been enormous. So I think there are other ways to do this. But I think it's been an important discussion, and I think the American people, everybody, has learned an awful lot more about the volume of data that's out there and what you can learn from that data. The notion, there's been a lot of talk about metadata, information about information, and I think people have learned that there's just an incredible amount of information that can be derived from it. You can learn a great deal about somebody from what their network looks like, from their goals, where they are, all of those things. And all that, something you learn from data. People are a lot more aware of that. And I think that's changing the conversation about privacy.
Part of the fallout certainly has been on the international front, certainly the Angela Merkel disclosures and things like that. And I know you've been personally sort of involved in that. Maybe talk a little bit about just, kind of your recent, you were a part of the U.S. delegation for some discussions with Germany. How did that come about? And what came out of the meeting that, from your perspective?
Yeah, the discussion was something called the U.S.-German cyber dialogue. It came out of President Obama's meetings with Chancellor Angela Merkel back in May as a way, I think, to try to defuse some of the fallout from the Snowden affair and to try to shift the discussion more constructively to what do we do about privacy? What do we do to strengthen security protection? But there's clearly still a lot of tension in that relationship. The day before we had the discussion, the German government announced that they're canceling the contract with Verizon because of concerns about the NSA information going there. And obviously since then, there's been all stuff about additional espionage issues that's come out. The tensions have gotten worse. The damage has been huge. I was talking about this in Boston a few months ago, and I had somebody come up to me say, we're a company that provides fraud solutions for banks. We had a deal with some Swiss banks in the works, and they don't want to do the deal. They don't want to do the deal because they're afraid that information of their customers will get into the hands of the NSA if it's on our system. But even if we put computers in Switzerland, we put our servers in Switzerland, they don't want to do it because they think that the NSA will be able to reach in and get it from an American company. So that gets replicated in a lot of ways. So there's a lot of trust
to rebuild.
What you've been talking about are a lot of serious perceptions and or misperceptions about how data, how it's used, how vulnerable it may be with American companies involved. How about the laws of protecting privacy, in which we take a lot of pride in our First Amendment and our constitutionally protected right of privacy, and yet the Europeans seem to have a perception that they're a lot better or more concerned about protecting privacy than we are. What's the reality versus the perception on that?
Well, the Europeans do have that perception, and they have their comprehensive your privacy directive, but they don't give the United States enough credit for the strong protections it has. The reality is that because of our Constitution and sort of our political culture, we have much stronger protections against government access to information than almost all European countries. We also have on the private side some strong regulatory regimes for health records, financial records, communications, children. We have strong enforcement by the Federal Trade Commission. And we have a lot of privacy practices that have been adopted and sort of incorporated into corporate culture as a result. And a lot of people who studied this would say that in practice, on the ground, that protections in the United States are stronger than in Europe. Now, what we don't have is a comprehensive law, and so there is a significant gap for a big chunk of, and an increasing chunk of sort of the whole online world is not protected by any existing laws other than Federal Trade Commission enforcement. And that's a gap that we need to fill.
It sounds like that's almost described, to get back to our 9/11 analogy, when Homeland Security, which probably for most people the term didn't exist before, and besides having a department, just the notion of it pulling together a lot of threads, it's almost, does there have to be the Department of Privacy, or in a more practical sense, what is it? How do you fill those gaps or make it, at the end of the day, make it work better?
So no, I don't think we need a Department of Privacy. I mean, we have a privacy agency, the Federal Trade Commission. What we do need is a law that makes privacy principles enforceable across the board, regardless of what sector you're in. And that's what the Obama administration proposed. So I was the architect of the administration's sort of blueprint on privacy, which articulated a consumer privacy Bill of Rights. So it's 7 simple rights: individual control, transparency, respect for the context in which information is collected, access and accuracy, security, focused collection, so not just hoover everything up, and accountability for all those things. Those principles are sort of well-tested principles in privacy, invented in the United States, and they underlie the European system. They underlie most of the privacy regimes in our laws or around the world. But we need to adapt them to this sort of new information age, and we need to put them into effect. But the way to do that is, not to be prescriptive, not to have the government try to step in and prescribe every piece of technology or every privacy practice, but make those principles legally enforceable, and then let the Federal Trade Commission enforce them.
Can we effectively, I'm going to put aside the politics or the difficulty of getting anything done in Washington right now, all right? But can we effectively legislate in this area on our own without without a kind of international effort or without the cooperation of international legislators or executive branches to make it work? Maybe it's not either or, but you know.
Yeah, that's a challenge. I mean, look, we have our own legal system. The Europeans have their own legal system. We don't have to match each other. What we do need is systems that are interoperable in the same way that nowadays you can have an Apple computer and a PC, and they can talk to each other. And that's what we need with data internationally. In this global economy, the ability to move data any place around the world, the ability to use cloud computing and other services is absolutely vital to our economic growth in the United States. It's vital to European growth. It's vital around the world. So we need to have systems that allow for that interoperability, to recognize differences, but can still allow us to move data around. We have something like that with Europe and something called the US-EU Safe Harbor Agreements that sort of recognizes differences but adopts some common principles. And I think as long as we have common principles, common values, we can get there.
Another of the areas that kind of similarly so important to economic growth is intellectual property protection, and people being those who create it, those who own it, those who distribute it, having an assurance that piracy and other challenges aren't going to undo that. Talk a bit about sort of some of the work that you did in that, and where's how do we get at the piracy challenges, especially in the Chinese market, probably most prominently.
Yeah, well, it's a continuing battle. Yeah, I spent a lot of time on China issues. I think I traveled there about every 6 months while I was at the Department of Commerce, and it was number one on the agenda in every major conference. But I think there's progress, there's slow progress, but I think as China kind of moves up the economic chain, as they try to develop their own innovation economy, they recognize that they need intellectual property protection, they need intellectual property enforcement. So we did see over the course of those exchanges increased engagement by the Chinese leadership. I traveled to some of the remote cities, to Harbin, way up in the northeast, and to Guiyang, way down in the southeast. And they were able to talk about their intellectual property and piracy enforcement programs. So they are getting there slowly. What's needed more than anything is the development of rule of law. I think as a lawyer, this was something I particularly focused on. But law and the enforceability of contracts and intellectual property rights is, it's as much a part of the basic infrastructure as ports or electricity or roads. And you can't have effective commerce and trade without that. And I think countries are seeing that makes a difference to their development. If you have predictable laws, predictable remedies, the risk is less. The risk is less. The cost of capital is less. And I think too, I did some work with intellectual property issues in Africa, and there are people there who understand that intellectual property protection is important to the development of their own industries. So, Nollywood, the film industry in Nigeria, can't survive without getting intellectual property protection, and their stuff is pirated. The same thing with artists and creators and innovators everywhere across the continent. So that's something that we were trying to promote.
Yeah, and It reminds me, speaking so much about China, that I remember back in the 1980s when Japan was our biggest threat, right? And we were all, I was part of hearings on, the Japanese coming in and buying up certain, strategic assets, et cetera, in the economy. And there was a lot of cry about we should have an industrial policy, and that's the way which we didn't impose, and things ended up working out, probably a lot better for us, at least until the financial crash, than for Japan over those years. But we're in a different world. Is there more that we should do in the States in terms of supporting, promoting, enhancing technological innovation or businesses? Is that, given China as a competitor now, is there more we need to do?
Yeah, I think we need to do more to invest in competitiveness in the United States. And we've done a lot with limited resources in the advanced manufacturing program to try to promote things like robotics, 3D printing, things that take high skills, where we have a real competitive advantage in the United States, and we're seeing some impact of that. I mean, a significant chunk of the growth in exports in the United States comes from manufacturing, and that really is that sector. And I think what people are learning in the business community is there are a lot of advantages to doing business in the United States. And I think the reshoring phenomenon that people talk about, businesses coming back to the United States, some of that is because labor in China has gotten more expensive, or energy costs have gotten cheaper in the United States. But I think it also is a recognition that you've got an educated workforce here, that you don't have the problems of intellectual property protection in the United States that you have in China or in other countries. So you can count on being able to keep your market share, and that's that's part of the problem for businesses going to China. That you may have an expanding market as you get this vast market that's now more and more people are entering the middle class. But people go there and the bottom line's increasing, while the market share's going down because the national champion competitors are on their way up. So people, they don't have those issues doing business in this country. They have, supply chain security. There are a lot of advantages to doing business in the United States.
I'd like to thank my guest tonight, Cam Kerry, for joining us. And thank you for joining us on CITI Media Reporter. I'm Howard Homonoff. Good night.